don't know if I should go on the podium or I shouldn't go on the podium.
Wherever you
much
feel
more
most comfortable.
You know, I feel a little bit like a podium guy. So, generally, what I hope to share today is a bit about myself, a bit about my experience with nature, and I'll just like to start off with the fact that I'm not much of an orator. If you're expecting some Churchillian rhetorical appeals or some incredible use of language, I'm not your guy. But I hope that I can kind of make up through a more authentic look into how I personally have experienced this really wondrous pursuit of traveling, of trying to understand what nature is like, and trying to understand what value it can bring to me. So let me start off with the fact that 2 years ago, two really important people to me have passed away, unfortunately. The first one was Antoni Steczkowski, who was my grandfather, and he was, and I appreciate this more and more over the years, he was a really foundational part of my family's experience of the world, and my own as well. And so what I found to be important in him, part of his character, was always that he led a very ethical, very determined, and very moral life. So I describe it as, you know, he came from a background which was always so poor. He came from a village during the communist era, which, as you can probably guess, isn't the richest and most privileged place you can be in. So he always had to struggle and to make his way in the best way he could. And in the same way, there was my great-grandmother, who also passed away those 2 years ago. And she too had a very fantastic but also arduous journey as she was becoming older, and as she was becoming first a grandmother and then a great-grandmother to me. So both of these people who really have shaped, I think, the family core for us, and have, when we were considering what we wanted to behave like, we kind of looked to them, and it implicitly seemed to be, they seemed like fixtures in our lives. When these people just dropped out, you could say, it was really quite a challenge. It was primarily a challenge for those around me, because I've had fewer experiences with them myself, but it was, you know, it always flows down, and you feel it yourself at a certain point. So as I was trying to understand and interpret what this experience meant to me, being in the US myself at the time, I often found going into nature, going into the wilderness, as a way to really relax, as a way to really appreciate that there is a place for reflection that I can go into, and that can give me some ease and some rest from the challenges that I was personally going through. So nearby where I was living, there was a little trail where you could go by, and there I'd often go there and just spend hours sitting by my local river and just trying to think about all the things I was doing. I had my Notion app out, and I was writing things down every now and again, and generally just having the time to appreciate the things around you, and to really have a sensory experience of seeing nature, of hearing it, of actually maybe even feeling it, if the water wasn't too cold. And that was something that really, that was my first introduction into how important that can be, to have this sort of space, like what we have right now, actually, to reflect, to consider, to recover too from the difficulties that you may have. And I think that was really important in my own experience, because it led to the capacity to really reflect authentically on the experiences that I've been having, and to also carry out served as a foundation for becoming a more moral person myself. I think that without this space that I had, it would be very, very difficult for me to have come out with these kinds of conclusions, which I did, which in my case was hopefully to make a contribution to other people, to give something back as they have for their whole lives. So that was really the motivation that kind of led up to the experiences that I've been having, and the reason that I'm here, really. So that was the foundation. Now, I was also curious when I was introducing myself to this talk, and when I was trying to understand what it is that I'd actually like to discuss here. I also was struck by thinking, what is it exactly? Why would it be that we find this so beautiful? Why did I find it so beautiful? And my approach usually to considering things like that is to look at possibly some of the mechanisms, to consider some of the, sometimes the pseudoscientific, sometimes the scientific, and just to use that as a means of appreciating nature and any phenomena really at a deeper level. So in my case, that was first, I was first introduced to why it is that this can be such a beautiful experience in the form of Benoit Mandelbrot, who was a great mathematician. He worked with fractals, and one of the insights that he gave was that perhaps what we like about nature is the fact that when you look at it, and as you come closer to it, it remains scale-free. So as you come closer, the details increase, and rather than becoming boring, as usually it is the case with skyscrapers, that as the closer you come, the less you actually see of it, and the less interesting it becomes. The closer you come to a tree, the more you see of its details, and you see the little minutiae and the little intricacies of what it can give you, and that's a really stimulating experience, and that's something that can be really, really beautiful. And I think that in my case, and in the case of a lot of people, I'm sure, we have this experience that, sometimes city life is just a little bit boring, and it's so overwhelming simultaneously, which can seem like a ironic experience, but I don't think it is. Because if you think about it, you can be really stressed and yet feel really bored, because what you're experiencing is just a lack of meaning in the activities you're doing. They can be really, really overwhelming and yet be incredibly boring. So I think that that's something that I find as an antidote through nature. It's the ability to really experience something that's meaningful, because it's always stimulating, and it's always puts you in a sort of mind frame which enables you to then reflect and to consider the experiences that you've been having, which it has for me, and I hope it will for you as well. And so that's one idea that I was really contemplating as I was making this speech. And I think that that's a good explanation for at least one of the mechanisms. And then the second one is much more related to, the ability to experience something wondrous. And I think that nature, and in particular when I was going out to this river and when I was looking at these trees and playing around a little bit, that was something that I experienced as well. Because when you have the chance to really focus on something for a while, I think that there's a tendency to start to wonder about what it's made up of. What are the little mechanisms that when you break them down make up the thing that you're looking at. So for example, a river to one person can seem like just like a running body of water, whereas to another person, a more physically inclined person, it can be broken down into almost on an atomic level. So I think in the same way, when I look at the nature around me, you see much more than what you're used to. And I think that that's something that really nature gives you the capacity to draw out, because it gives you the space, it gives you the time to do so. Whereas if you're in a city, what you have is just the overwhelm of day-to-day minutiae, which prevents you from actually considering, but why, right? So why is it that way? Why does it look that way? Why is it moving in this way? And so I think that nature provides you with that capacity to a great extent. And I think that that's even historically true, because there's a little story that I've known from early physics, and it's that of Tycho Brahe, who was a Danish astronomer, and he would just look into the stars and make these really pedantic measurements of how the planets and the stars are moving relative to the Earth, which can just seem like such a boring activity, honestly. But what it led up to was eventually the student Kepler. From these little minutiae, he discovered some underlying principles, some underlying laws, and then kind of in parallel there was Galileo, who did pretty much the same thing as Brahe, and he also took these measurements and started to outline some ideas about what nature really, what the foundations of nature are built upon. And I think that then from these people, from these foundations, from these people that just spent their lives looking into nature, considering it, contemplating it. I mean, if you think about it, in the early days of science, people were called natural philosophers. They were philosophers who peered into nature and actually tried to understand it more deeply. And so, from these people's work, in our case, eventually all trickled down, and then we had Newton, and everybody knows about that guy. So that was clearly something that's insightful, and it has some social implications to it as well. So I think that in our case, what we have the chance to do when we think about nature, when we contemplate and when we work with it, is the chance to not only take out some personal, emotional insight of it, as I have done, but also to simultaneously get some social value out of it, which to me is a really important value that can come out of it. And personally, I certainly found that to be the case. I know that when I was younger, I was always playing around with building dams and generally breaking stuff, especially in my local garden. And that, I think that's something that really gave me an intuitive insight into how nature can function. And that in turn sparked an interest and ambition for exploring that in greater depth, which is why right now with YouTube and all, I have the chance to pretty much at my fingertips, I have the chance to explore these subjects in more depth, which is why I find them so interesting. So to conclude, I think that when we think about nature, we often get this almost intuitive sense that there's something about it which we can appreciate, which we can value. But I think that, in a sense, it is a much more important, it serves a much more important service for us than we can realize. It has these social implications, it has these personal, reflective implications that we often fail to appreciate, but yet, if we were given the chance to use them, if we were given the chance to put them into our own lives and to implement them, we'd find that it's actually an incredible environment that we can build for ourselves. So, in my case, what this means, in the case of Manchester in particular, I think that there's an immense need for us to take what we have, to take this beautiful environment that we've been given, and to try and preserve it to the best of our capacity. And so with that in mind, I hope that you've been inspired a little bit to understand why it is that that's important. And I hope that you'll get the chance to experience it in the same way that I have.